Oh, thank you, friends. Good to see you back again. What a great lunch we had. Let's show our appreciation to the cooks and the. Oh my gosh, what a feast! It's my pleasure to introduce you to a good friend of mine. You may have met her, Mr. Seta Roach, and she's going to be doing some singing now, and then we're going to be launching back into some more beautiful content. So, over to you, Seta. And if you could put the microphone in the microphone stand there. If you don't talk through it now, people at home can't hear.
Oh,
so talk into the mic is better.
okay.
Just stick it in there when you're
done. Okay, turn to your yellow page, your yellow sheet. We've got two songs to sing. I don't think you know this first one. It's a Samoan song, but I translate by verse to each verse there. So, but we are singing in Samoan because these girls here, they practice in Samoan. And then when we come to this song, yep, okay. And when we come to the second one, this is something different. I want you to close your eyes because we really need to focus on the second. And Colin's gonna sing this out for us. And then you open your eyes. When he finishes, then we can join the second time. So let's do that. Thank you, team. So yep. So this is okay. This time, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to focus your eyes and the eyes of your heart to the Lord. And be still as we hear from Colin. And after, we'll open our eyes and join us again in singing those sweet verses.
Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Join me. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. But I am the Lord. Just reflect as I sing this next verse. In thee, O Lord, do I
going? Yeah, good. It's always encouraging when people come back for an afternoon session. They never quite know why they come. They come because they were so excited by the morning they want more, or they come because over lunch they've been having a beef about what's being said and they want to come to argue. Whatever, that doesn't matter as long as you don't go to sleep in this particular session. But as you were talking over lunch, as we continue to think about how do we teach our students, how do we teach so that our students are transformed for impact, how do we teach so that our students go into their churches and for their churches to make an impact on their societies. I wonder if over the course of lunch anything came up and you said, oh, I better talk to Allan about that, or I'd like to ask a question of Allan. Were there any issues that came up over lunch that you thought, oh, did someone say to you, oh, I hope Allan addresses that, or was there a question that someone asked you and said, oh, they don't want to ask it, but you might ask it on their behalf? Any particular questions or comments from this morning? Oh, that's... Yeah. A very interesting avenue to explore in terms of theological education is and we'll touch on this in a few minutes, is what it means for us to be hosts and to what extent meals and hospitality feature as part of what we are on about, as part of the essential process of our theological education. But we'll touch on that as we go on. I noticed that all the praying togethers have gone. If anybody missed out, why don't you let Asita know? I've got more copies up in Auckland, and if other people do want copies of praying together, then I'm very happy to send them down, and she can get them to you. So let her know if you'd like a copy, but you missed out on one. I don't think there's any other bits and pieces I need to talk about on that. Okay, so when we think about teaching for impact, then the whole issue of what sort of teaching, what's my role, and what sort of faculty member is needed. Now here, I'm going to start by not using the term teacher, because in a sense that leads us in a particular way, and we want to think about that this afternoon. But if we're going to teach so that our students are impacted, we looked at the ways in which the things we can do to make sure that our students are better impacted. But then what about our role? Well, as you think about yourself as you're teaching at your best, what marks your style? Think about that. And finish this sentence. I reckon I have been effective in my role as a teacher here, or for those who are not teachers here, I think I've been effective in a role when I've been teaching in a small group or in some other situation. I reckon I've been effective when, and finish that sentence. Come up with 2 or 3 suggestions, and see how you go. Think about it to yourself initially. I think I've been effective in my role as a teacher when, how might you finish that sentence? When you're teaching at your best, not at your worst. What sort of suggestions do you come up with? How would some of you finish, teachers, how would you finish that sentence? I reckon I have been effective in my role as a WPBC teacher when...
I'm thinking of 2 extremes.
Give us one of them, Colin.
I reckon I've been most effective when I have prepared my material in detail.
Yeah.
I've been most
Infected,
when
yeah.
I've pushed them apart and gone with the Spirit.
Okay. Yeah, good. So 2 there. Somebody else? I reckon I have been at my best. I reckon I've been effective as a teacher when...
Warm and friendly.
When you've been warm and friendly. Okay.
I think thinking of the
Yeah.
It would be most effective if, at the end of the class, the students, or at the end of the course, the students are able to see Jesus more clearly in Scripture, especially in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Do a lot of Christology in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just amazing to me how Jesus is there
In the Old
ways
Testament.
that we don't necessarily
Yeah.
see on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that relates particularly, Dennis, to your subject areas. That's great. Yeah. Others of you? I reckon I've been effective when
They focus on the task at hand.
when the students have stayed focused, or you, where?
My thing is to prepare the material.
Yeah.
So I have to continue focus on that task, giving out rather than drive away the other side instead of
Okay.
just to the point.
You're keeping focused on the task and keeping that good focus. Great. Somebody else? Oh, you have your turn in a moment. I'm going to get the students, but the teachers. I reckon I have been effective when
I have a good rapport with my students.
good rapport with students.
When I allow students to share, like, so I facilitate, not to teach, but
Right.
facilitating them and open up
Right.
more.
Okay. Where you've facilitated the processing by the students. Anybody?
When the light bulb comes on.
Yeah. Yes, when the light bulb comes on, indeed.
Bring interesting stories.
Yes. Yes. And something resonates as a result of that. So those are some of the times when we as teachers reckon we've been effective. Reality check for the BTH students. What features of theological education teachers actually have helped you learn best?
I was just going to say, like, when something the teacher said, you actually go and ponder it. You know, you're still unpacking it a week later.
So something that struck something there, and you have to. It's not forgotten.
Yeah.
It's not put in the mental waste bin at the end of class. Sort of taken it away. Okay. Other BTH students?
I think it's when their passion captures you,
Okay.
you know, and like you want to learn more and you want to know more about that subject and you want what they've got.
Right. Right. When something it's not been the content, but it's been something in the way that it's been presented, or the person, the character of the teacher that sparks something. And I want to teach theology because so and so was my teacher. Okay. One more BTH student. What features of theological education teachers help you learn best? You're just observing today. Okay. The way they teach? Okay.
I think it's just a realization that something that I'm personally, of course, that I haven't thought about it before, that it's not that important, and yet the way it's told,
Yes.
taught,
Yeah.
and then you realize that the Holy Spirit is
Right.
all
Right.
part and parcel.
Yeah.
You've got to know the history
Yes.
of the church,
Mm.
and then the light bulb comes.
Mhm.
You know, this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's the whole, you know, in the whole picture.
Right.
That's how God is speaking.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got to know, not just bits and pieces, but the whole, how it's all started.
Right.
And people that went before us. And, so that's the power, and that's what it's all about. And it's just, and then we have that their passion, the teacher's passion, rubs on us, and we have the same passion.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
And that's God.
Yep. So seeing God, in a sense, seeing God at work through the teaching process, of which the teacher, we as teachers are an important part. But ultimately, as I said before, it's God's It's God's business. God's the ultimate teacher. But what sort of channel are we for him to work and for his Spirit to be at work? And that's all fascinating to listen to those areas, and where you as teachers, you're not starting at square one. There are things that you do that the Holy Spirit is using, and rejoice in those, but recognise that we're all on a journey towards greater excellence, towards greater competence, to be used much more effectively by God's Spirit. I'm a bit reluctant to use the term teacher because it's very loaded. Because when we think about teaching, if we were to think about, well, what is a teacher? Think of a teacher is, look at these images and see what you make of them. A number of images. What does each image sort of portray of a person who could perhaps be called a teacher? What are some of the things that picked up, ideas that come out of those images there? Caring. One in particular? The first one, okay. Yeah. Coach. Coaching in which one? The middle, the top middle one. Yeah. The third one. Yeah. Okay. I'll come back to the third one in a moment. Sharing. Are they the bottom one? Yeah. Yep. Yep. Fellowship. It's lemonade they've got in those mugs, of course. I think it's Martin Luther who used to enjoy going down to the local pub and used to have his classes in the pub drinking their ale or whatever. Okay. What about the bottom left one? Yeah, the coaching, but it's in the medical imagery. What is it sort of leading?
It looks like mentoring and interpretation, and perhaps a senior person with a technician or something.
A junior doctor?
It's a teaching opportunity.
Yeah. So that's sort of more the hospital metaphor of the specialist working with the trainee doctor. A bit different to coaching, different to the sports team coaching. Right. The ones on the right are quite interesting. In that one at the top, who might be the teacher? Is it mum or is it the daughter? In the yeah, I think if it's computing, it's more likely the young one trying to help grandma discover that a mouse isn't the animal that's scurrying around, but you move a mouse on the computer screen, or the how to fix a problem. And the bottom one's an interesting one too. What sort of teacher in that situation? What might be going on? What might be the dynamic? Demonstration, yeah. It could be, but what about the possibility that it's actually the son helping the father to have fun? Dad's too busy; he's at work so much, and finally the son's got him out into the park, and it's actually the son who's teaching the father that it's okay to relax and have fun and just be more laid back. But all of those seem to bring up some ideas that could potentially be seen to be part of what we build in to what it means to be a theological education teacher. We teach by metaphors. We teach effectively by particular metaphors we adopt. And when we think about teaching, we can think about a number of metaphors, pictures, that we use to influence the way that we are involved in teaching. So these are some of them. Coach, a technician, a facilitator, perhaps a storyteller, master craftsperson, with someone you're helping to develop the skill, perhaps a friend, something like a priest perhaps, or a shepherd guide, a host in a hospitable space, a guru, and there are possibly others also. And you can identify with a number of those, and the question really is, well, which of these do you identify with as a teacher here at WPBC? What do you see your role most as? Is it as a storyteller, conveying the stories of the faith to people to pick up and then to pass on to the next generation? Is it a craftsperson where you've got you know how to create the pots, and you try to help the students to create pots of their own, clay pots? Is it as a shepherd guide, sort of working alongside, facilitating, coaching could be part of that? Is it as guru, sage on the stage, and what I want you to do is you'll adopt my style and you will do what I do, as you seek to become a guru yourself. What is the image? What is the metaphor, the sort of picture that you have in mind when you think about being a theological education teacher or in a theological education situation? And it really depends on how we define a teacher. And I'd like to suggest that a teacher is someone, could be something, from whom we learn. And so it's the question really of, well, teaching what? Or learning what? Or learning how? That if a teacher is someone who facilitates learning, then it's much less about who we are and what we convey, and much more about who the students are and what they need, and how we work to make sure that they pick up what they need for effective learning. Learning what? Learning how? Well, that goes back to the whole question of impact. Transformation for what? But what are we encouraging them to learn as they go through the course? And that's where you discover, if you don't already know, haven't already picked it up, that what is important to put in your course outlines is not teaching outcomes, that in this course I hope to teach this or this or this, but rather to make sure that you've got learning outcomes. By the end of the course, I hope that the students will have learnt, will have picked up this and this and this and this. And your role then as teachers is to ensure that the learning has taken place, not that you have conveyed stuff in the hope that the students will then learn. You are a facilitator. We are, as teachers, are facilitators of learning, not those who are conveying and leaving the outcome solely to the students. And recognising too that especially when we are thinking about learning for transformation or for impact, that there's a difference between formal and informal teachers. That in going back to the images before, yes, we are sometimes often put in the position of being formal teachers, say in a classroom situation, but actually a lot of our teaching is done informally as we are encouraging as the students are learning from us in informal ways. The way we relate to them as people outside of class would be a key. The way that we are compassionate with them, get to know them as people, recognise that they're on a journey and walking with them, empathy, and those sorts of areas. And again, I think some of us might be a little bit put off or put out to discover that actually some of the learning that takes place could be negative, something that we would consider to be negative because of a word that I've used or a way that I've done things. And students have reacted to that and have learnt something that's actually at odds with what I was hoping they were going to learn because of something I've done as a teacher or the way I've conducted myself or done certain things within a teaching setting. Thinking of models for that, note, for example, what we see in Jesus' training and equipping role with his disciples. Sound principles of adult learning going on there with the disciples, this learning community on the move as he travelled, as Jesus travelled with his 12 disciples, for example. And as they were going about life, discovering this, Jesus would talk about it, the disciples would ask questions, show their ignorance, Jesus would work with them further. And so far less of Jesus' contact and teaching of his disciples was formal. It was much more this sort of, well, actually the term is non-formal rather than informal, sort of learning taking place, but in a less than a formal classroom or teaching school type situation. We see that with the Apostle Paul, picking up ideas of this as he travelled around. Paul does a lot of more formal teaching in the synagogue, debating, discussing, in the lecture hall of Tyrannus, for example, debating with the leaders, but also as he took people like Barnabas and others with him. And we can only imagine the sorts of conversations and interactions that went on as Paul and his companions travelled around and experienced the ups and downs, the tragedies and the real encouragements of their life as they were sharing the good news of the kingdom of God in the situations where God put them. And those of you who are familiar with the work of the Old Testament scholar Brueggemann, Walter Brueggemann, will know that his book, and I forget what the title is, but where he looks at the form of the Old Testament as a sort of an educational form, where he looks at where he takes the three parts of the Old Testament, and with the Torah, you have got the instruction in the faith. In the prophets, you get the idea of the faith of the prophets as catalysts, helping the people to recognize what's going on, to listen to God where they have failed him, and the like. And then in the wisdom literature, the whole concept of facilitating, guiding, coaching, mentoring that comes through the wisdom literature, the Psalms, Ecclesiastes, and the wisdom literature. And so there are some of the models of teaching that we see in the Bible, the New Testament, and Jesus, and Paul, and indeed in the Old Testament. So when we are working with our students, we need to recognize that we're dealing really with an ecology of settings in which learning can take place. In ecology, the idea of the relationship between plants and other living organisms, animals, beasties, and the like, and how the change in one impacts on the other. And so it is with theological education, where you have a whole ecology of settings in theological education ventures. This is more within a residential situation, but a lot of these would apply also to you in one way or another here at WPBC. But you've got what goes on in the classroom, you've got time in the library, assignment students are given, being together, meals together, the interaction between the peers, students as peers, sessions you have with students to mentor them, to tutor them, and the like. Mission teams, if they go out on some sort of mission activity. You've got all those settings, and they all are going to impact. And all of them have some sort of teaching potential about them. Generally, we would see that there are four main areas. The formal studies on one hand, the community rules and the community activities on the other, the pastoral support systems that are in place, and personal modelling. And we as teachers can have some impact in each of those areas as we have contact with the students. And as our teaching role as whole people seeking to bring about integrated and holistic transformation of the students takes place as these are brought together in an integrated way. And so when it comes to thinking of our role, it's not just when we turn up to class on a Wednesday evening to work with the students. Actually, our teaching role encompasses any of the context and all of the context that we actually have with our students, or that we, for some reason, don't have with the students. What are they missing out on if we don't interact with them informally, if we don't have the occasional meal with them, or if we don't have some other opportunity visiting them in their church, or whatever might come up and whatever works for you and for them. So it seems that our role can be in whatever metaphor we adopt. All of those have some elements that we can build into our teaching role as we are designing to facilitate learning, transmitting information. Yes, that's part of it. Being a catalyst for the students learning for themselves and developing these skills of lifelong learning and meta-learning, learning how to learn, guiding, coaching, mentoring, catalyst, and then the facilitating role, the guiding, the coaching, and the mentoring aspect. So those are what we're thinking about when we think about being a teacher. It's really, okay, it's elements of this, and which are the ones that are going to be most important for me in my particular teaching, my particular role with the students. I mentioned before that I've been involved in a new initiative called the Faculty Enrichment Initiative in Asia, where we're involved in teaching and equipping and enriching faculty members in seminaries in Southeast Asia. And we were trying to think, well, what actually, with that in mind, what actually is what makes a competent faculty member? And we tried to formulate it and say, well, okay, what are the areas where we think that a faculty member in a theological education setting might need to be increasingly competent? And this is sort of painting an idealistic picture, but we've come up with 5 areas that we think are important. That a competent faculty in theological education, first of all, need to be responsive communicators. They understand adult students, or they understand that by and large they're teaching adults who are being equipped holistically for maturing discipleship and mission leadership. So to be able to be a responsive communicator, you can communicate effectively with students who are there and responding to them and who they are. The second area is to be a proficient educator, shaping integrated learning activity, the learning processes efficiently in both formal and non-formal settings. To be reflective colleagues, growing in self-awareness of who they are, what they bring to their role, and the sense of collegiality with others. Competent faculty are transformational leaders, able to apply the dynamics of theological education for transformational impact for God's mission through their seminary and through their teaching there. And then finally, innovative teachers, utilising available resources, especially in the information and communications technology area, for best practice and effective equipping. And so this is really saying, well, an ideal faculty member, and there are not many of those going to be around, but what we aspire to is to be more effective in those 5 areas. And what I want us to focus on a bit more this afternoon in this session is to think about, well, what does it mean to be a reflective colleague in our ministry? Because being reflective and being a colleague seem to be 2 key elements that are going to be most important for us to be effective and to help our fellow teachers to be effective in the college. It's not just my role, it's our role together as we are impacting on the students who come through the college, and a number of us are working with them over their time with us. So there are 2 things that I want to suggest are important. How do we teach so that our students are transformed? Well, first of all, we teach from who we are. We teach out of ourselves, out of our own experience, and then we teach as colleagues. The first area, we teach from out of ourselves and our own experience. Some of you will have come across the work of the Quaker writer, educator Parker Palmer, He's written books particularly to know as we are known. It would be the one. And he's said this, often quoted, "We teach who we are." So the first question asked should not be what will be taught and how will it be taught, but rather who am I? Because as we learn more about who we are, we can learn techniques that reveal rather than conceal the personhood from which good teaching comes. And so the first component of being a good teacher is that we teach out of who we are. We're not just imparting disembodied information, but we teach who we are as a person is going to be an essential and a crucial part of our teaching role. And so primarily, who are we? Well, primarily, I'm a redeemed and a resourced child of God. That God is incarnate in me. I'm embodying the Spirit of the living God. And that is what is a key definition of who I am as a theological education teacher. But I'm not perfect, as much as we would like to think we are. We're not perfect, and we come with our strengths and our weaknesses. We bring strengths to the task. And you've highlighted some of the strengths today as we've been chatting about what you do well, and what you find encouraging. But we come with strengths, we come with weaknesses. But the weaknesses are not necessarily negatives in terms of our teaching. They can actually be positives. So we come as, again, in Nguyen's term, we come as wounded healers. We come as, in a sense, of those who are offering to support students, help students on their journey, but we also are wounded. We also are in the learning process. We also are allowing the Spirit of God to work in our lives, as hard as it might be at times. And so we are wounded. We come as teachers, as wounded healers, and in that sense, vulnerable. We make ourselves vulnerable. We encourage vulnerable learning, where by teaching, we recognize that we do make ourselves vulnerable if we are going to be honest with our students. We'll recognize that we need to keep close to God, and that will apply in all dimensions of loving God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength. And so growth is a lifetime process. It's something that's holistic, theologically and intellectually, spiritually and emotionally. That our growth needs to be going on. Are we growing even as we're seeking to help our students to grow? Are we growing professionally in terms of our role, understanding our content better, understanding teaching skills and practices better? And are we growing socially in terms of being able to relate to our students, to be able to relate to our colleagues? And so growth is, again, a lifetime process that we ourselves as teachers need to be involved in, even as we're encouraging it in our students. And so what are some of the key features of teaching from who we are as we teach out of ourselves and our own experience? 4 or 5 ideas. First of all, humility. That humility should be the first mark of what we bring, that it's only by God's grace that I've been invited into this opportunity to walk alongside these people God has entrusted to me, and the humility that I don't have all the answers, that God is going, I need to rely on God and His strength to help me to lead the students on through the course, work with them, facilitate their learning. It's a gift from God, and so we come to it humbly. We think of our own personal experience, and so we think about, well, how can we use our own personal experiences to illustrate what we're talking about? And someone mentioned this before, that one of the things you appreciate is when teachers, what you appreciate as a student is when your teacher shares something from their experience. And so to be able to share from our experience rather than just sharing objective facts will be a key. And that experience could be where we've struggled to understand or to appreciate or to align our lives with what we might be teaching the students and asking of them to do. It's a case of really balancing the realistic with the idealistic, that to help the students see that ideally this is a situation, but realistically it doesn't work out that way. The kingdom is here, but not fully. The kingdom is now, but still fully to come. And that works itself out in our lives as teachers, as it is working itself out in the lives of the students. So again, making ourselves at times to be vulnerable by what we share, as we share ourselves with our students, even within the context of the particular course that we're teaching. And then to see ourselves with the students as being co-learners, that God's the ultimate teacher, and to convey to the students that even as I'm teaching the students something, so we're actually learning together under God. And that can show in interesting ways. It can show in the situation where you as a teacher are teaching something, and then you say to the students, wow, or a student might share an insight, and you genuinely say, wow, that's something I haven't thought about. That's challenged me. Or, gosh, that's fascinating. I need to do something about that in my life too. So this is part of showing that you're not above, on the stage above the students, but you're actually a co-learner with the students and open to learning from them. It's fascinating to think of all the with words in which Paul uses to talk about people collaborating. And it's those sorts of ideas that is at the heart of this being, we are co-learners together. The words, the Greek is the sigma, gamma, nu, I think it is, S-Y-N, sin, the sun, S-U-N, called together with, share with others in, rejoice with one another, heirs with one another, join and struggle together, a fellow prisoner with, fellow worker, share together in the glory God has for us, built together, live together, grow together. All those words, those are the same sorts of ideas that we can say, well, if it's important to do things together in terms of Christian discipleship, how do we express that in our teaching as teachers, in the courses and in the classes that we're doing? And so being a co-learner is a key, and then growing, for example, in Christ-likeness, seeing the fruit of the Spirit changing and maturing in our lives, love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, long-suffering, especially when you have students who you have to suffer long, or whatever. So how do we teach so that our students are transformed for impact? I had a fascinating email just this past week, and it was from a theological education lecturer in a Bible seminary in Bangkok. Steve is his name. He's an Englishman, but he spent the best part of 30 years in Thailand. And he'd been asked to lead a Bible study for a group of church leaders, including those from theological colleges. And he'd asked us to pray, and I wrote back and said, yeah, I've been praying. How did it go? And he wrote back, thanks all of you who prayed for yesterday. The topic I'd been given was Mission Without Borders, and I focused on God's heart for the world and the way of incarnation. I brought the challenge of being humble servants, releasing the next generation, and the need to avoid some of the temptations, particular to the Thai context, which may go in the opposite direction to incarnation. It's impossible to know just how God will apply his word to those who were in attendance, but I did feel a sense of liberty and had encouraging feedback. So thank you for praying. Please continue to pray that God will keep his word in our hearts and cause it to be fruitful. And I thought, hey, that's fascinating how he's put that, because at that stage I was preparing for these sessions, and I thought, that's right at the kernel, that's right at the heart of what it's like to be a theological education teacher. Humble servants, seeking to release the next generation, helping them to avoid some of the temptations particular to their context, which may go in the opposite direction to incarnation. That's what our task is as teachers. And so who we are as we do that is going to be a key. And it's impossible to know what the outcome's going to be. But do we feel a sense of liberty in how we work with our students and then leave the outcome to God? Encourage people to keep praying for you as we indeed pray for ourselves. So we have those areas. Secondly, before we have a chance to just think a bit about this and chat about it with one another, we teach from who we are, but we also teach as colleagues. And I want to stress what it means for me to be a faculty colleague. We often, especially in a college where it's a non-residential college, where you're part-time tutors, you come in, you've got your class in an evening, you go away, and you don't often interact with the other teachers. But collegiality seems to be important. Collegiality is more than being congenial. It's more than just seeing another faculty member and being happy with them. Collegiality is much more than that. It's about trust. It's about openness. It's about support, and it's about collaboration with our colleagues. It's about saying we need each other. We're not alone in this. And of course, because students are going through a number of different courses, all of which are going to contribute to what they end up with and what they're like when they leave. It's so important that we know what others are doing and that we work with them, our faculty colleagues, to enhance the best sort of equipping for our students. And so this can work out in a number of practical ways. Look for opportunities to tell our stories to one another, our life stories, but also what's going on in class and the things that are working well and the things that are not working well, and talk about it with each other. Look for an opportunity to meet with faculty, other faculty, and tell each other the stories of what's going on. You might do this especially when you have students who have particular habits that seem to be, and you discover that it's not happening just in your class, it's happening in somebody else's class as well. How can you deal with that particular situation? Sharing resources and methods, what's worked for you. Just take an opportunity to say, hey, in class today I tried this and it worked well. And, oh, that's good, I might try it too then. You try it, report back and say, that suggestion you had, hey, that worked well, or I had to change it a little, but I think it got the same effect. That will be mutually encouraging. Engage in joint work. This is a bit harder, but is there some sort of opportunity to share a class occasionally with another colleague, faculty colleague? Invite another faculty colleague to come in and either take a class in your subject, or come in and you interview the colleague, or the colleague provide some input in some sort of way. So you're seen to be working together in a constructive way in that particular class, drawing on the strength of another colleague. Reflect with each other. Reflect theologically, reflect pedagogically, how you're doing, reflect missionally about what's going on. Look for opportunities, and perhaps today is an opportunity, has been a bit of an opportunity for that, especially as I've given you some opportunity to meet together and to talk together. It may be the first time you've done that. I'd say keep working on it. Look for opportunities to help each other. Another strategy that sometimes works in terms of your own pedagogical skill is, say, once a term or once every 2 terms, invite another faculty member to come in and sit in on one of your classes with the brief to look for what did I do well and what could enhance my teaching. And so you're there, you're teaching the class, the faculty member you've invited is sitting at the back, fly on the wall, soon ignored by the students, and then afterwards you go out and get a cup of coffee, and you invite your colleague to say, look, what in that class, what went well, what did I do well, and secondly, what could have enhanced the learning experience for the students, and see what comes out of that. Talk together So mutual enrichment, mutual encouragement. So encourage. When my wife and I were about to go to Asia, we went for a meal with an elderly couple who had been missionaries in Malaysia for many years. And I still remember after the meal, we were sitting in the lounge having a cup of tea. He said, "Oh, Allan and Marvin, as you go to Malaysia, there are 3 things you need to know." Now, we were young, we were green, we hadn't been much overseas, we were new missionaries, so we were all ears. He said, "Oh, the first thing is be flexible." "Oh, yeah, be flexible." "Yeah, and the second thing?" "Oh, be flexible." "Oh, great. And the third thing?" "Be flexible." Well, I'd want to say for you, as faculty colleagues, 3 things. 3 things for you as faculty colleagues. Encourage each other. Encourage each other. Encourage each other. It's your task together as a faculty. And the more you can express that as a faculty, the more impact you're going to have as you work with the students. Becoming, if you like, what's termed in the literature, a community of practice. Your practice is being effective in theological education. Become more of a community that does that. Looking for formal ways, a bit like today, looking for informal or non-formal ways where you can encourage each other and work with each other. So 2 things about our roles as teachers, teaching from who we are, and then teaching as colleagues, co-labouring in a community of practice. As we do that, as we think about then what's our role and what sort of faculty is needed, take just a few minutes turn to 2 or 3 other people and start processing that in the light of what we've discovered. What is our role, and what would be a more, what do I need to do more effectively? What is sparked by how I could grow in my role as a faculty member, as a teacher, as a result of what I've been talking about. And those of you, the BTH student, you can do the same as you move into teaching situations, either not in Bible college necessarily, but in your churches. What of what we've been speaking about in terms of teaching from who we are and teaching as colleagues, what resonates there? What might you be able to do differently or better as a result of what you've been hearing this afternoon? 5 minutes for that, then we'll have a bit of a break. Round off your discussion. There are, hang on, go back a bit. There are two reminders that I'd like us to go away with as we think about who we are as teachers. First of all, the first reminder is that it's not my task to ensure effective learning in the students. It's the students, it's the triune God that we're in partnership with, who is the ultimate teacher. And he's the one who's going to bring about the changes. He's the one who's the ultimate teacher. We're in partnership with him. And then two sayings to keep in mind. One from the missionary statesman Hudson Taylor, the founder of the China Inland Mission, which became OMF International, the mission that my wife and I are with, that God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. Now, he was speaking in terms of financial resources, but the same can apply to us as teachers. God's work, if we're doing it in God's way in our teaching, will never lack God's supply, God's resources for what we need for that. And the resources may be supernatural, but they may be one another, as well as the other resources of workshops available and skills that we pick up. So God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. And then don't forget, of course, Jesus, who said, I will be with you always, that he will be there with you. Just before we finish, in your handout, the final 2 pages, I didn't mention this before, but there's 2 pages, a summary from a report on educational practices that benefit Pacific learners in tertiary education. That I should have mentioned that, or could have mentioned that, when we were looking at the cultural things to take into account, cultural features, factors to take into account when we work with our students. That there is a good summary of a fuller report, and the report and the summary are both available in the Dropbox link. So that there is our first session that was going to finish at 11:30. And so we can reset our watches. Don't forget tomorrow's daylight saving finishes also. So we're now at 11:30, and we're going to have a break, but not lunch. When we come back, we're going to skip the session on assessment, I think. And we will spend the rest of our time looking at how do we develop student study skills. The assessment one is an important area, but I think that can be done in another workshop at some stage. I don't think we should rush through that. And I think that developing student study skills might be more productive in terms of some of the bigger issues that we have with our students and the questions that you have raised on that. So let's take a break for 5 minutes. And then when we come back, we'll look at that area of developing student study skills, which will take us through to the end of our time this afternoon. Let's have a break, stand up and stretch, drink of water and the like, before we move into our next session.